Join me right now, Omarosa Manigault Newman, the former Director of Communications for the Office of Public Liaison in the Trump White House. Of course, Omarosa is also the author of Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House. Omarosa, it's always good to get you on the show. So specifically today, you were on Trump's transition team in 2016. You were in the midst of all that chaos with Trump in 2017. Do you believe Jim Jordan? I mean, where do you think his focus is today, 71 days before inauguration, that being Donald Trump, not necessarily Jim Jordan?
Well, first of all, great to see you, Alex. I wouldn't believe a word that came out of Jim Jordan's mouth if it came notarized. But in terms of what Donald Trump said he would do when he became president, and there was a long list, my word to you and anyone who's wondering is take Donald Trump at his word. There are a lot of things that he said he was going to do. The first thing he said on day one was that he was going to be a dictator. The other thing he said is he was going to pardon all the January 6th convicted felons and folks who were involved on that day. He said he was going to get rid of the Department of Education, that he was going to lower taxes for the wealthy from 21% to 15%, that he was going to fire federal workers. What Donald Trump said he was going to do, take him at his word.
President Biden, as you know, invited Trump to visit the Oval Office Wednesday. He's also pledged a seamless transfer of power. Of course, that is very different from Trump's approach when he lost in 2020. So knowing Trump as well as you do, what do you expect from him at Wednesday's meeting?
Well, I want to talk about the transition as a whole. You were absolutely right. During the first Trump transition, it was complete and total chaos. But this time, I believe that the Trump team is much more prepared. In fact, they have a playbook, and we all know now that Project 2025 was not an illusion. It is actually their playbook that they're going to implement. In terms of the meeting on Wednesday, expect Donald Trump to enjoy being back in the Oval Office, to really put it in Biden's face that, yes, I won, and to just revel in the moment and enjoy the fact that he is victorious. So you'll see a lot of the showmanship that we've seen from Donald Trump over the years. But I remember the day that Donald went down the first time to meet with Barack Obama in the Oval Office. And it was covered from the moment that he left Trump Tower to the moment he got to the Oval Office. Expect much of the same from this meeting between now President-elect Donald Trump and sitting President Biden.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be the overhead helicopters showing every movement of the car. Oh, 100%, yeah. But I want to ask you about that chaos in 2017. How chaotic was that chaos? What was it like?
Well, just remember, as a member of this executive committee for the transition, we were told to go to Washington, report to these offices. And the first thing I remember about the offices were that the offices were painted in like a pink color. I think that there was some anticipation that Hillary was going to win. And the first gentleman's office were painted blue. But we had to sort out the office spaces. Then we had a long list of all of the political appointments that were vacant and that he would need to fill. We had to make a distinction between the ones that would be Senate confirmed and the ones that he could just appoint. This time, I believe that Donald Trump already has his team teed up. And I must say, Susie Wiles is an excellent choice for his chief of staff. Susie and I worked together in the first term. The first time he was running, when we went to Florida, Susie orchestrated the entire operation in Florida. And I believe that she will be the one and only guardrail that will keep this administration from going totally and completely off track.
You know what I've read about her is that she's somebody that you don't want to cross, you can fear her, and at the same time, she's a grandmother who loves bird watching.
She is a grandmother. She is a mother. I know her daughter and I know her family well. But one thing about Susie is that she likes organization and she likes things to be organized and for them to run as they're supposed to. She does not like chaos. She's smart, she's shrewd, but she also is a woman of her word. When Susie says she's going to do something, she's going to do it. And it will contrast between Donald Trump, who is very impulsive, who does not follow through on some of the things that he says he's going to do, and he jumps around a lot. So Susie will be hopefully the only guardrails that will save American democracy.
And I'm going to ask you about the guardrails in a second, but she says the clown car can't come into the White House at all. Is she going to be able to enforce that?
Well, Many have tried in the past. I think if there's one person that can do it, it is Susie Wild.
What about when you look at the current team? Do you see anyone who can play that guardrail role, or do you think the most extreme voices are going to win out?
Yeah, there's a lot of extreme voices that are still around him. The first, of course, is Stephen Miller, who has already said that he wants to implement those elements of Project 2025. But in terms of appointments, we heard that Donald is not going to have Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo. But we also know that the Rick Grinnells are coming in, and maybe the David Urbans are coming in, and maybe the Boris Epsteins are coming back in. And those are the people who are quite extreme. Maybe Rick Grinnell will be appointed to be Secretary of State. I know that's what he wants. Let's see if that's what he gets. But we'll have to watch to see if Donald Trump will be more measured. I will absolutely say no, but let's hope for the best.
Okay, well, why don't we have you back periodically and we can measure the success of the expectations versus your prediction. All right. Thank you so much, Omarosa. It's always good to see you. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex.